Okay, get ready for one of the most bizarre and frankly unbelievable stories in history. We're talking about a time when the two biggest superpowers on the planet, the United States and the British Empire, were literally aiming cannons at each other, ready for all-out war, all because of a pig.
I know, it sounds completely absurd, like something out of a comedy sketch, but this is a 100% true story. It's a perfect storm of vague treaties, really stubborn farmers, and a general who is maybe a little too eager for a fight. So how on earth did things get so out of hand?
Well, our story really kicks off with a map-making blunder. The whole problem started with the Oregon Treaty of 1846. Now, this treaty was supposed to draw a clear line in the sand, or, in the water, between American and British territory in the Pacific Northwest. The only problem, it really didn't.
Here's where it all went wrong. The treaty's language was just way too vague. It said the border ran through the middle of the channel. Simple enough, right? Wrong. Because when you look at the San Juan Islands, there are two major channels, the Haro Strait and the Rosario Strait. The treaty never bothered to say which one, and that one little omission was about to cause a massive international headache.
So naturally, both countries just picked the channel that benefited them the most. The Americans said, oh, obviously the treaty met the Haro Strait, which would give them the San Juan Islands. Meanwhile, the British said, nonsense, it's clearly the Rosario Strait, which, surprise, surprise, would make the islands theirs. For years, these beautiful islands were stuck in a kind of diplomatic no-man's land.
So with the border totally up in the air, you had both American and British settlers moving in, each thinking they were on home turf. And this is where we get a classic neighborhood squabble that's about to go global.
Let's meet the two guys at the center of this mess. First, there's Lyman Cutler. He's an American farmer, and from what we know, he wasn't exactly the hardest worker. He'd built this kind of pathetic three-sided fence around his potato patch. His neighbor was Charles Griffin, an Irishman working for Britain's powerful Hudson's Bay Company, which ran a huge pig farm right next door. You can probably see where this is going.
Yep, Cutler's open invitation potato patch was just too tempting for Griffin's pigs. One pig in particular, a big Berkshire boar, just loved digging up Cutler's spuds. This led to some pretty heated arguments between the two men.
Griffin's supposed reply tells you everything you need to know about how stubborn these guys were. Neither one was willing to budge. Because for them, this wasn't really about a pig and some potatoes. It was about who had the right to be there. They both thought the other guy was the trespasser. And then, on June 15, 1859, it happened. Cutler found the pig in his garden yet again. And this time, he'd had enough. He grabbed his rifle and shot it. To his credit, he went right over to Griffin and offered to pay for it. But Griffin demanded $100, a totally insane amount back then. Cutler said no way, the British authorities threatened to arrest him, and just like that, a backyard dispute became an international incident.
This is the moment the conflict blows up. News of the dead pig travels all the way to the head of the U.S. Army's Department of Oregon, a guy named General William S. Harney. And, well, Harney was not the kind of guy who lets a good crisis go to waste.
To say Harney had a reputation would be an understatement. This guy was a total hothead. He absolutely hated the British, was famous for disobeying orders, and had even been court-martialed 4 times. He saw this whole pig thing not as a problem to solve, but as a golden ticket to fame and glory. This is a chilling look at how one commander's personal ambition can threaten to plunge nations into war.
So Harney comes up with this incredibly reckless plan. He orders a young captain named George Pickett, yep, the same Pickett who would later lead Pickett's charge at Gettysburg, to take 66 soldiers and land on the island, supposedly to protect American settlers. But his real plan? He wanted to provoke the British into attacking, start a war, and grab the islands for the U.S. And he knew it would take a whole 6 weeks for word to even get back to Washington, D.C., giving him plenty of time to light the fuse.
Harney's move was a huge escalation, and the British responded exactly as he'd hoped. They sent warships steaming towards the island. Suddenly, this wasn't about a pig anymore. You had the most powerful navy in the world staring down a tiny company of American soldiers on a remote island. And just look at how dangerous this situation was. You have Captain Pickett and his 66 men facing off against over 2,000 British Marines and sailors on warships bristling with cannons. The Americans were outnumbered more than 30-1. It was an absolutely impossible situation.
The tension must have been just off the charts. The British warships aimed their cannons right at Pickett's little camp. When they demanded he leave, Pickett shot back that if they tried to land, his men would make a Bunker Hill of it, meaning they would fight to the very last man. A single shot, a single mistake, and a war between superpowers would have started right there. right when war seemed all but certain, a few key people on both sides took a step back and realized that starting a global conflict over a farm animal was, completely insane. This is the part of the story where, thankfully, the adults finally entered the room.
You really had two camps here. In one corner, you had the warmongers, America's General Harney and the British governor, James Douglas, who were both itching for a fight. And in the other corner, you had the peacemakers, British Rear Admiral Robert Baines and, coming in a bit later, the top American general, Winfield Scott.
And this quote right here is the absolute turning point of the whole crisis. The British governor ordered Admiral Baines to land his Marines and start shooting. But Baines, looking at the situation, just flat out refused. He said he would not involve two great nations in a war over a squabble about a pig. It was an incredible moment of courage and common sense, and it probably prevented a catastrophe.
Back in Washington, when President Buchanan finally heard what was happening, he was absolutely horrified. He immediately sent the head of the entire U.S. Army, General Winfield Scott, a guy who, by the way, could not stand Harney, to go fix this mess. Scott was a brilliant negotiator, and he quickly worked out a deal. Both sides would leave a small group of soldiers on the island in a peaceful joint occupation until diplomats could sort the whole thing out.
So the immediate crisis was over, which was great, but the big question still remained. Who actually owned the San Juan Islands? The final answer to this decade-long standoff would end up coming from a very, very unexpected place.
You're not going to believe this, but that temporary joint occupation lasted for 12 years. Soon after it began, the American Civil War broke out, and everyone kind of had bigger fish to fry. Finally, in 1872, both nations agreed to let a neutral third party look at the evidence and make a final ruling. And who did they pick as the unbiased judge? None other than Emperor Wilhelm I of Germany. He reviewed the old treaty, looked at the maps, and ruled in favor of the United States. The British accepted the decision and left peacefully, but not before digging up their flagpole and taking it with them as one last tiny act of defiance. And so, after 12 years of military standoffs, diplomatic arguments, and the very real threat of war between two global empires, the only casualty in the entire pig war was the pig.
It's a hilarious story, for sure, but it also leaves you with a pretty serious question. What would have happened if men like Admiral Baines hadn't been there? What if everyone involved had been as reckless as General Harney? The pig war is this strange but perfect reminder of just how fragile peace really is, and how a tiny dispute, when fueled by bad information and big egos, can spiral out of control.